All right, hi folks. This is Mr. Powell with Knowable World, and I'm here again with one of my wonderful students. This is Elowen, and Elowen is part of my elementary class in Europe, Russia, and the world we live in. That's part of our 3-year program rotation at Knowable World. And so Elowen's going to be regaling you with her knowledge of Russian history. Oh my goodness. So, Elowen, first, let's start where we always start at Knowable World, which is we are trying to understand the world we live in. We do not just study the past, we study the past in order to understand how did the world come to be the way that it is. So at the beginning of the year and at the beginning of every interview, we start with what kind of world is it? Tell everybody about the world we live in.
The world we live in, an interconnected agglomeration of nearly 200 countries, organized into 10 major cultural blocks, mainly controlled by cardinal cultures, in which the United States has primacy.
All right, excellent. So most people think of the world as 200. It's a very big puzzle, difficult to understand. But we organize it into 10 cultural blocks, and 5 of those are cardinal cultures, the most important ones. And what about Russia? Which one does it fit into?
Russia is a cardinal culture.
It is indeed, and we can see that in a number of ways. One is militarily powerful, and unfortunately, it uses that power in ways that a lot of us wish it wouldn't, including what's going on today.
It's attacking Ukraine.
It's the Russia-Ukraine war that started about 3 years, almost 4 years ago now. Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay, so it's a cardinal culture. In fact, Russia used to be one of only 2 cardinal cultures. When I was your age, Elowen, there were only 2. It was the United States and Russia, and they were trying to control the world. They were locked in what we called the Cold War. And now, though, Russia is less important than it was because it's no longer trying to convince and force everybody to accept what idea?
Communism.
That's the one, right? So we say about Russia today, starting in 1991, what happened in 1991?
Fall of the Soviet Union.
There we go. That's our first anchor fact, as we call it. The Soviet Union collapsed, and Russia became what? It was communist before, and now it's what?
Post-communist.
Oh my goodness, right? So post means what?
Was.
Yeah, it means it used to be, right? It means after, right? So it is no longer, and it's really hard to say what Russia is now. It's not very clear, except that we know for sure that there's one guy in charge. What's that guy's name?
Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, that's the one, right? And he's been in charge for like 20 years, and that's not how it's supposed to work in a real democracy. And we don't really think that Russia is a real democracy. It's kind of lost. And Vladimir Putin thinks that the best way to continue to be important in the world is to wage war against his neighbors, especially at the moment, Ukraine. All right, so what we're going to do, Elowen, is we're going to allow you to help us understand how did Russia come to be this way, this post-communist country that's kind of grasping at its cardinality, trying to hold on to it with Vladimir Putin in charge. In order to understand that, we have to study its history. So let's dive in. All right, Elowen, so now let's go back to the beginning of Russian history. It's always surprising in some ways, no matter how ancient a culture is, and Russia's been around for well over 1,000 years, the beginning of the story matters. And so tell us about the beginning, and then we'll talk about why that still matters today. How did Russia begin as a country?
Founding of Kievan Rus Circa 862.
Okay, so Kievan Rus, tell us a little bit about that. That sounds familiar. The word Kievan and the word Rus. Okay, what's going on there? What are those words about?
They're the capital of Russia.
Okay, the capital of Russia was Kiev. Why does that strike us as being strange today? It's no longer the capital of Russia. The capital is Moscow. But Kiev, as we call it, is the capital of what country?
Ukraine?
Yes, indeed, right? So, in other words, the first version of Russia started in what we think is today Ukraine. They were one country, they were one culture. And do you remember the name of the conqueror who came in? He was a Viking conqueror and conquered the Slavs.
Rurik.
His name was Rurik. Okay, and he started the first dynasty of rulers. And they're kind of chugging along in their own isolated story because back then, in what we call the Dark Ages, everybody was far apart from everybody else as they're barely getting organized. Those of you that know European history might know, as Elowen does, that just prior to this, Charlemagne had tried to organize Europe into a single country but failed. And now Rurik was actually succeeding in doing that in Russia, but they really knew nothing of each other. And the Russians were very isolated from Europe in their early history. And so really the only people they had very significant contact with were the Europeans in Constantinople. And those people believed in a different version of Christianity than most people in Europe. So that's part of the story of Russia. But also, the people of Russia had a big headache for a couple hundred years caused by people coming from Asia. Who were these people?
The Mongols.
Yeah, the Mongols. And the Mongols controlled most of what we call Ukraine, not so much Russia. So, where the leaders moved to Moscow instead of Kiev. So the story of those two countries starts to be two stories, but really they started in the same place. And for a long time, this was what Russia was about, kind of being independent, and they managed to do it. And meanwhile, Europe is growing and changing, and the Russians are slowly learning more and more about it until one very important czar. First, before we say his name, can you tell everybody what a czar is? The Tsar is the Russian version of what word?
Caesar.
Caesar, as in Julius Caesar. And by the way, Elowen, you haven't learned about him yet, but that's coming up in our Roman history as we're doing the background to European civilization right now. So that's just around the corner for you. Okay, but the Tsars, the Caesars of Russia, eventually became rather interested in Europe, which was more advanced than Russia. And one of them decided he wanted Russia to become a European country. Who was he and what did he do?
He was Peter
And he's known in history as Peter
the Great.
Peter the Great, okay. Whether or not people are actually great in history is a little bit tricky, but he did accomplish something important. What was it?
He accomplished going from Russia to Europe.
Okay, and how did he do that? Somebody was blocking the way. It was Sweden. And how did he kick them out of the way?
The Great Northern War, 17 to 21.
1700 to 21. Okay, very good. And he defeated Sweden and started to have access to what we call the Baltic Sea. And that's water. And back then, that was very important, right? No airplanes back then, no trains, no easy way to get around. The best way to get around is by sea. So Russia started to become a European country. And that has both pluses and negatives. At first, it was kind of pluses, but when did it start to go negative?
When Napoleon invaded Russia.
In what year?
1812.
Very nice, right? So Russia had gotten tangled up in what we call the European balance of power. and Napoleon invaded Russia and made it all the way to Moscow, he probably should have conquered the country, but it was strange. What happened? Why did he fail?
He failed because Russia burned the food.
That's right. They burned the crops. They used what we call scorched earth tactics. And then something else. He didn't have enough food, and Moscow itself was burning, and the winter was coming. And then what happened?
They froze to death.
Right, because they didn't have any food, and it's super cold. And yeah, Napoleon had a huge army, but it was defeated in this way. The rest of Europe then ganged up on him and eventually defeated him completely, with Russia as one of the allies. But Russia was having a really hard time being a part of Europe from this point onward. All right, starting with Napoleon's invasion in 1812, Russia started to feel the pain. They didn't like being a part of Europe. They got beat up a few times. These are not our anchor facts, but for the listeners today, I'll remind them of a few. Like, for instance, there was the Crimean War that I talked to you guys about, where France and Britain ganged up on Russia, and then Russia fought against Japan and also lost, and Japan had become much more advanced at that point, and the people of Russia were getting impatient because they wanted to be a great country, but they were losing wars. And then they lost one really badly, and this led to a massive change. So, what's our next anchor fact of the story, Elowen?
World War One.
World War One, okay, in which Germany was attacking Russia, and Russia lost millions dead in this war, and the people blamed the Tsar. So what happened?
The Tsars got kicked off the throne.
Yep, the Tsar, in fact, he gave up. The Tsar abdicated, as we say, and that left nobody in charge until somebody said, I got all the answers, everybody. Who was that guy?
Karl Marx.
Oh, well, sort of, right? Because Karl Marx had already said, I've got all the answers. But this Russian person said, yeah, Karl Marx is right, but I've got a fast-forward button on Marxism. Who was he?
Vladimir Lenin.
Okay, right? Vladimir Lenin said, Karl Marx explained that history is all about people beating each other up, and eventually what's going to happen is somehow magically everything's going to be okay. But it's going to take a long time, and countries like Russia, which are rather backward, are not going to get there soon enough. So Vladimir Lenin said, I can get us there faster, because I'm not just a Marxist, I believe in, what do we call it?
Communism.
Exactly. Communism basically means everybody has to follow orders from Vladimir Lenin, of course, give up all of their property, and then the Soviets, as they're called, the workers' councils, will organize all of the factories and the farms, and Lenin will tell everybody what to do, and it'll be great. That's right, isn't it? Like Russia did really super great? No, it did not at all, right? They almost starved to death. So many people were killed. They almost starved to death. America helped save Russia in World War I and after World War I. So Russia was barely going to survive the beginning of communism. And then things got worse because World War I, clearly, as the name suggests, was followed by what?
World War II, 1939 to 45.
Okay, so now Russia's again being attacked by Germany and again barely surviving. But they did, and once again getting a lot of American help through what we call the Lend-Lease program. And then America attacked Germany on the other side of Europe. And at the end, they were working together here. But Elowen, you know what Knowable World students know. Just because people are working together in a war does not mean they are what?
Friends.
Okay, right? Normally people say this expression. What's that expression that people normally use?
The enemy of your enemy is your friend.
Right. And we learn at Knowable World that that is not true at all. People have to think things through because Whether it's Athens and Sparta working against Persia, or the United States and Russia working against Germany. Or give the folks another example just to show off your knowledge from European history. What's another example of temporary allies that are not friends?
The Franks teaming up with the Romans to defeat the Huns.
Excellent. Amazing. Amazing. The Franks and the Romans working against the Huns who had invaded Europe. But then, as we know, the Franks were part of the reason why the Roman Empire fell. They helped take it apart. So they weren't friends. So yeah, we study many examples of this kind, and we learn, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. At best, Elowen, the enemy of my enemy is my
temporary ally.
That's the one, right? Russia and the United States were only temporary allies in World War II. Okay, so now we've got a little bit more to go, and the story's gonna bring us back to the present, right? Because America and Russia were not friends. Russia was communist, and the United States was trying to protect democracy in the world wars. So they were on opposite sides. And Russia and America are trying to prove that that's where we started, right? With these two cardinal cultures. But if you're competing with the United States, which has a lot of weapons and where the people are free and can every day make all the things that they want for themselves, and you're the leader of Russia, you got a problem. Because you got to tell your people to make lots of guns so that you appear strong, but if they're spending all of their time making guns, what are they not making?
Butter.
Yeah, that's right. That's a famous problem called the guns are butter problem. The people of Russia never had enough food for the Cold War, as we call it, for the duration. And finally, the leaders of Russia figured that out, and they said, you know what? We have to stop being communists, and that brings us right back to where we started, right? In 1991,
fall of the Soviet Union.
We have the fall of the Soviet Union, exactly, and Russia becomes post-communist. So there you have it, folks. Elowen has given us a quick tour of Russian history, from Rurik to Peter the Great, to Napoleon, to the World Wars and communism, and finally back to where we are today, post-communist Russia, struggling to maintain its cardinality in a, what kind of world is it?
American-centric.
Yeah, that's what Vladimir Putin wakes up every day with a headache. That's why. All right. Thank you so much, Elowen. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to having you back so you can show what you're learning at the Knowable World program. Thank you.